Hello, I am Jack Brewer, and this is the Wayward Sons book group, where we discuss and read my nonfiction book, Wayward Sons, NICAP and the IC. I'm with Expanding Frontiers Research, which is a Salt Lake City-based nonprofit organization. It is tax exempt under Section 501c3 of the U.S. Internal Revenue Code. Visit us at expandingfrontiersresearch.org and browse our Expanding Frontiers Research Patreon for more resources and interesting information. You can find those links in the YouTube video description. I'm joined tonight by a group of folks that are knowledgeable and interested in the UFO phenomena and aspects thereof, sometimes the social circumstances, the government circumstances, and what a week it has been for that genre. I think we will start tonight by discussing some of the goings-ons of late. A website, war.gov, recently posted dozens of records responsive to UAP or UFO from historic archives of various government agencies. It is attributed to the U.S. Department of War, and journalists have often described it as a Donald Trump release of records. We're going to be discussing this tonight, along with circumstances related to public significance. For instance, Pentagon top official Sean Parnell asserted on X recently that in the first 12 hours that the website was up with these files, it received what he termed 340 million hits, giving some context of public interest. For a little more context, the adult population of the United States is estimated to be about 267 million people. So even if his assertion is partially correct, and as Randy and I considered in a Blue Sky exchange, it depends on how you count those hits and things like that. But nonetheless, it's not hard to see why the intelligence community might be interested in the UFO topic. And it's not difficult to see why the Trump administration might want to take some credit for bringing some type of disclosure that has been long awaited by the UFO genre. I thought we should start by acknowledging how these records actually came to be published. And even though journalists and outlets are often calling it a Trump release, a more accurate description would be that in legislation that was enacted during the previous administration, it was established that various agencies would collect the records they had that were responsive to terms like UFO and send them to the National Archives and Records Administration, NARA, to be processed or reprocessed if they had already been released. So it's a bit disingenuous to say that this administration is leading the way to UFO disclosure or some type of government transparency. However, it does get complicated in that it's certainly correct that there are a number of Washington elected officials that are interested in hitching their wagons to the UFO topic. And even the legislation during the previous administration, where that actually came from, was the dubious 2017 New York Times article, kind of started the new wave of UFO advocates and self-described whistleblowers and politicians getting on the bandwagon, offices that were open to investigate, and that led to the legislation. But then, if we even go back before that, as people like James Carrion have covered and are currently covering, Stephen Greenstreet has covered extensively, we're going to find Robert Bigelow and Harry Reid and the Defense Intelligence Agency funding of a project that was dubiously called some type of UFO investigation surrounding Skinwalker Ranch. And then that ties into the Area 51 and Bob Lazar and all of these often debunked stories. And as many people here have also explained on podcasts and in articles for years and on social media, we have the same network, the same fundamental core group of people that have been presenting this narrative for decades that lacks solid evidence. Yet, I'm just trying to say now that this is where this legislation comes from. And I just thought we should cover that for starters. And I want to encourage all of you to weigh in with any thoughts you have on that. And I'm going to be deferring to Jeff for what he's finding in the files and his interpretations of how this came to be, what his interpretation of the story of these records is. But any comments from anyone to help get us started about the fundamental issues here?
Will you just briefly again summarize the legislation part of it?
Sure. There was an office called the All Domain Aerospace Resolution Office, AARO, AARO. And it was enacted out of the hearings and the stir that was brought up after the 2017 article in the New York Times, among all of those activists like To the Stars Academy. And this legislation that I don't know the bill number off the top of my head called for records to be reviewed and sent to NARA for further declassification and release, if applicable. Would you like to add to that, Jeff? You might could fill in some more color on that.
Yeah, so basically every year there's something called the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, which has to basically do with funding and what the various defense agencies have to do. And so back in 2023, one of the kind of addendums, amendments, whatever you want to call it, to the 2024 National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, said, as Jack explained, that these documents, all these different government agencies had to go and look for all their old UFO documents and dig them out from the archives and provide them to the National Archives. That passed both houses, whatever, and was signed into law by Biden in December 2023. So all these documents were in fact being prepared for the last couple of years. In fact, the FBI documents were ready to be sent to NARA back in May of last year, and they had notified NARA that the documents were already ready. And so none of these documents that we got released this month, this last week, were actually anything to do with Donald Trump or anything he may have said to the media over the last couple of months. There were documents that obviously had been in the work for years. It takes time to collect, scan, prepare documents. They didn't do all this in the last couple of months. They didn't pull this out of nowhere. This is work that pre-existed the Trump administration. And so it's kind of frustrating to see all these people talking about, oh, Trump's a great hero for getting all these documents out, when it had literally nothing to do with Donald Trump. If anything, they've held on to these documents. They missed the deadline. They were supposed to turn them over to the National Archives, and they've been holding on to them. And they've now used it as kind of like a little political coup here, that a win for them, that they're now the transparent, president, when it's kind of silly. Like, it's not the transparent presidency. These documents and the history of how they came about is, years old at this point.
Yet, here's the rub. There are indeed elected officials, mostly Republicans, I think, like Burchett in Tennessee, Luna in Florida, who for years have been pushing for more release and more information, and regularly make just wild conspiratorial assertions to journalists and media outlets. So they want to take credit for anything they can, and all of the problematic aspects that come with that. Like, for instance, former congressman and former intelligence community personnel, Denver Riggleman, had an interesting blog post at his Substack this week where he shared a personal interaction with Congressman Burchett. And in my opinion, Burchett is kind of typical of people in the UFO community. Representative Luna isn't all that off the beaten path as the UFO community goes either. In fact, they remind me a lot of people you might meet at a UFO conference who have not been at it long, that might just be in their first three. Like when you're new to it, it's like, oh, Jeff, man, you got to read this Sitchin book. It'll explain it all. And then if you're really open-minded, you meet some Hebrew scholars that can explain to you what that language actually means and can explain to you why Sitchin is framing it in ways that he chooses to frame it, and that the Hebrew scholar community doesn't agree with. And that example in many more ways on many more topics. But does that help, Sharon?
Very much, yes.
How about you, Rand? Go ahead, Sharon.
An acquaintance of mine and Allison's hosts a documentary night that we watch online when I can join, and she makes it a topic that's relevant to something that is happening in the news right now, not because we might believe anything that's in it, but so that we stay abreast of things that are talking points that are coming out or that sort of thing. So last night, I didn't watch the whole thing because I had to, but I watched the first part of Age of Disclosure. And Tim Burchett is in there, Anna Paulina Luna, and I was like, wow, they've been at this long enough to have filmed this. And then do not forget that Anna Paulina Luna in March hosted members of the Russian Duma to the Capitol. She is a well-known I don't know.
Per Dave Troy, not to interrupt you, but Dave
Right.
Troy has kind of put that her and I think Burchett they're parroting Russian talking points regarding UFOs.
Which just goes hand in hand with what we were considering in chapter 7 about as far back as 1968 that the State Department was monitoring what are Russian scientists saying about UFOs, that in my opinion was to evaluate what the American CIA officers and scientists want to say about UFOs to influence other scientists and global intelligence community. Yeah, and I should also, for clarity, I'd like to say when I made the remark that Burchett and Representative Luna aren't really that far off from the rest of the UFO community, I should clarify their remarks are completely unsupported and wild-eyed conspiracies to a critical thinking genre, to people that seek to refute or support any given statement. But they're very typical for what you might find if you just go to the annual MUFON symposium and you can just kind of, sit down at a table and have lunch with a group of people that just matter of factly talk about the alien structures on the moon and things like this, that it's an interesting outlet. Like, they get to go to these conferences and these places because, typically you can't discuss such things and be accepted with discussion of them in your regular lives. But as the discussions have been going around the community, we're kind of enough generations into this now where those kind of people are in Congress and they're in the intelligence community, and you can't really tell anymore if an intelligence officer is running some kind of game or if he legitimately believes that he's been regularly abducted by aliens and that there's a presence here and that he's been implanted. And there's just some disconnect between his story and, well, why doesn't the agency you work for do enough medical testing to figure out what you're talking about? I mean, these are complex social issues.
Yeah, at this point, UFOs and aliens have been such a part of pop culture and just the popular lore in movies and TV and just everywhere, that anyone alive today essentially has grown up with that being part of their world, being cognizant of it, having it filter in, seeing the movies, believing the narratives, possibly. So yeah, whether they're pilots or politicians or whatever, they've all grown up in the same pop culture that we have, right? And have been influenced by it. Clearly, some of them.
How about you, Randy? Any thoughts?
I don't really have too much to add about, what the latest news this past week. I'm, interested to hear what some of the other people have to say. The point I was making about the number of hits was just that they use the phrase hits and not like page views, which made me think, well, maybe they're not talking about page views, but the number of components that make up a page. Like if I loaded the main page from that Department of War UFO URL, it made like 80 requests. And so even if I round it up to 100, say it's 100 hits per page, you're still talking about, millions of page views in the first several hours. So really, however you look at it, it's a lot of traffic in just a short amount of time. So there's a lot of interest, as you were saying.
Yeah, like even if it's content creators that spent 3 days viewing it 900 times a day to come up with their podcast or whatever they're going to do, that still represents a lot of people that want to know what's in it for so many content creators to be viewing it. What are your initial thoughts, Rachel?
Well, I think it's weird that that's so well, I mean it's not weird. Well, it is weird. I don't know. It is and isn't weird. Um the that like that people there's this common sort of perspective like that people have on UFOs, like my mom will sometimes send me like a link to something, or actually we were just talking about these latest files and she's like, "Oh, you might find this interesting," and I was basically explaining to her what Jeff told me because I haven't really looked at the files. But I have a little bit, but not very much. And but it's very much like this. She's done this before, which I love my mom, and she's extremely intelligent. She's very well educated and like knows a lot. But like she'll see UFO stuff and there's and get immediately misguided by it. Like she sent me a like this George Knapp documentary, I remember, and things like that. And I'll be like, "Oh yeah, this guy's a total grifter," and like blah blah blah. Or like with the UFO files, it's just like, "Yeah, this is totally just Trump using like a red herring kind of thing to distract from, the Epstein files or something like that." And yeah, it's sad, I think, that people have this idea of like of what UFOs are about, and it's pretty much like that's like 99% of what you call the UFO genre, and because I think that there's stuff there, with UFO culture and with natural phenomena like ball lightning and stuff like that. And that stuff is really, really fascinating, and it just so few people know really much about the anthropology of UFOs or the physical science of UAP, and to the point that both the terms UFO and UAP do have kind of a stigma around them, I think. And it's not because people are just marginalizing UFOs and UAPs. I think a big part of it is because there's just so many people saying very stupid things about UFOs.
Stigma is
Yes.
deserved.
Yeah, and the stigma is often deserved. It is. Yet there, like, I'll put it this way. any topic can make a good subject of research. You can research anything you want. It's the research methodology that makes it good or bad. It's not what you're focusing at, it's how you focus and what your methodology is for trying to learn about it. And that kind of segues us into Jeff Knox, who is here with us, has downloaded all of the files. I will provide the link to his Google Drive in the video description on YouTube. He has even made them searchable to a certain extent. And that was an initial complaint, that not only did we have to view and download the records one at a time on war.gov, they weren't searchable. So if you're just interested in, like, is Joseph Bryan in any of those records or no, it's just an overwhelming task. Was that a hand up, Rachel?
Oh no, that was a hand clap.
Oh, a clap for Jeff.
For
Yeah.
Jeff.
Yeah.
But
So,
Jack, to your point, right? Like, not even the release of the information was done in a way that suggested that getting the information out there to people was the objective, right? It just seemed like it was being used as another tool to drum up publicity and attention and the usual things, right? Like, everything about this release was so UFO to me, from the disappointing nature of it, even to, you know, Jeremy Corbell and others always banging the drum about transparency and these things belonging to the people and the taxpayers. Meanwhile, they're hoarding them for years and doling them out piecemeal to mainstream media outlets for profit, right? Just so UFO.
It did indeed. That if they had even so much as consulted with an armchair recreational archivist, much less professionals at the National Archives, then they would have known that there were a number of ways that would have been more efficient and more effective to present this. And with that, Jeff, tell us about what you've loaded at Google Drive and what you've been encountering, please.
Yeah, so yeah, first of all, yeah, they just dumped these files kind of on the war website, just as PDFs, essentially, in an infinite scrolling table that you'd have to go through 18 pages to kind of like look at them. No way to even search metadata about what might be in each individual file on their site. At this point, there's been a couple other people that have actually built whole new websites around these files that kind of allow you to search inside them and then like link out to the PDF page that your search results are on. A particularly good one is called probed.space. But there's a few other ones that have been built. But when they first came out, there was really no way to search through them in any way at all. So I had downloaded all of them. They had kept like a record of every PDF they were offering up in a CSV file on the website. So I was able to grab them all out of that. And I took the files, there's some 162 files, but only about like 18 of them or so are really old documents, or like these document tranches that were put out. And I took those and I ran them through OCR software called Tesseract, which is, it's all right. It's not perfect. There's much better OCR out there, but it at least allowed me to bulk OCR them real quick so I could do some basic searches inside of them. Since then, there's another guy that has put all the files through something called Mistral AI, which has made almost perfect text transcriptions with layouts of every file, of all these different files that I can share. I'll share the link of as well, because there's pretty much, you can now also just get a text file that's a perfect transcription of the PDF files. So I kind of uploaded that, and I've had the opportunity to go through a lot of these files. They can pretty much be broken up into a few different kind of groups of files. A lot of them are FBI files. And they're in fact the same files that have been on the FBI vault for a very long time now. Fortunately, these are better scans, higher resolution scans and copies to look at. And that they, for the most part, they're further unredacted compared to some of the redactions that we've seen in some of the old files. And the interesting thing about that is it kind of shows how stupid some of the original redactions were in the first place. Now that we can read the unredacted forms, it's like, why in God's name did they redact that in the first place? This is ridiculous. But so most of the FBI files are old ones we've got before. I haven't gone through all 4,600 something pages of files. I've gone through quite a bit of them. And in the FBI files, they seem to be identical to the old ones. There are a few new things I have found. In fact, the only really new things I found relate to the UFO case we talked about either last week or the week before with the Colonel Amos case that he was involved with. And from the new files, we've actually got a sketch that was drawn for the case. And we've got a copy of the 2 UFO sighting reports that Lou Corbin sent in. We also have a better high resolution scan of the Boyle-Reese report that the FBI originally had that we had seen before. So that's a couple of new things. Yeah, Jack?
That's really interesting that that's one of the only new things, and that they were redacting all these years the report, given to Corbin and stuff. That's really interesting. Yeah, and I was gonna ask you, so most of it is just reprocessed stuff that was already released and maybe has further declassification.
Yeah, a lot of it is just it's the higher resolution scans, whereas the old stuff was just really bad, horrible, looks multi-generational Xerox copies that were put up on the FBI website. Some of the pages you could barely even read. The stuff that's out now looks to be high resolution actual photos taken of the pages, like a proper archivist would do. That's been released, and they've removed a lot of the redactions. Like Jason Colavita pointed out, a guy that he originally thought one of these letters was referring to Richard Shaver. That's who he thought was under the redaction. We now know it was in fact Richard Shaver because we can see his name there. Again, why they felt the need to redact Richard Shaver's name in the original files, who knows? And another funny weird thing is I've actually found a case file that has got more redactions in this new release than the old file that we already had. And that relates to the 1955 case when Senator Richard Russell was in Azerbaijan on a train, and he and some of his aides and whatnot saw, a flying saucer essentially. And so the FBI memo that was put out, this week actually is pretty heavily redacted, large boxes that are blacked out that aren't redacted on the stuff we got like 50 years ago. And so that's a single case I found where the redaction trend is actually reversed and they further redacted stuff. And that's probably because, sometimes documents get released from different places, like the FBI will have a CIA file or the CIA will have an FBI file. And one agency will decide something doesn't need redacted and put it out. The other agency, even now may look at it and say, oh, we need to redact that because of such and such laws, privacy laws. We still have to redact it, even though that file had already been released in the past.
That is interesting. I've seen similar happen like that I'll get the same document from 2 different agencies that will be processed differently. Yeah. If anyone has questions or comments, please feel free to jump in.
Jeff, I know this is speculation, but just out of curiosity, is it possible or would it be true that if, for instance, Shaver was a CI or an asset, they would have just redacted his name as general practice?
Yeah, maybe. But I think it was probably just because of privacy concerns, releasing people's names in general.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
I can tell you along those lines, Stephen, what a couple of points here. One, like Jeff was saying, that this all was discussed when the legislation was enacted a couple years, 3 years ago. We had all these conversations. People that were around the UFO community at the time know there were all these blog posts, all of these podcasts, all of these videos about what might come out of the documents that might be processed and released. And you like it's an easily traceable thing. Like if you went and searched YouTube or UFO blogs, you'd find people discussing it at the time. Another point to what you're saying, Stephen, is there were researchers like me, like James Carrion, like I think you probably, that were hoping we'd get some of the answers to the social questions out of this stuff. Like if we go all the way back to 1947 and we really honestly put it all on the table, well, then maybe we'll get some answers to what Roscoe Hillenkoetter was really doing in some of these interactions with scientists and NICAP and things like that. James Carrion, like I say, has done a lot of work around this. And there are some really interesting aspects to it. And yet another point to what you're saying, Stephen, is I submitted an appeal just this week on records that I got from the FBI that are redacting entire pages under FOIA exemptions related to sources and means, which would be confidential informants and things like that. They typically are really strict about that, and they often don't even care how much time has passed. Yet that's another reason I shared that part of that document a week or two ago. Remember, we were looking at Frederick Durant, who was on the Robertson panel. And when they found out his uncle was a manager at TASS, the Russian news agency, they post haste went and reinvestigated him. And they didn't have any concern at all. And that one about naming informants in the records that had even requested to be kept confidential. And, I can see where, after 60 years, they're not worried about it. But it does have, like you're getting at, Steve, it has an interesting lack of integrity to how that flow chart must work on informants, And we'd hope that we would get more information like that, like what's going on with the contactees and stuff like that. But go ahead. Did you want to say something, Steve?
No, I just, we were all disappointed, right, with these releases. Time and time again, everyone's kind of disappointed with them. I will say it's nice these days that they do give us at least classifications of redactions over top of the black marks to help, so we're not totally in the dark.
Yeah, I at least know what exemption to appeal. This is true. So, Jeff, what was your overall take on the release and the rollout? And what did you find? What would you say was most interesting about it?
Well, so like I said, a lot of the files, the stuff we pretty much have already had. Alejandro Rojas has been working on a spreadsheet that talks about whether or not we've already got the files and when we previously got them and when they were declassified, that kind of stuff that I've been helping them out with. And some of the stuff that was released was some of our early government UFO documents related to Project Sign and the kind of 1947 era, 1947, 1948 era. Again, all that stuff we pretty much already had before. And interestingly, one of the incidents out of the 300 is missing. I noticed yesterday, incident 46, which was a June 1947 case in Greenfield, Massachusetts. That file is conspicuously missing out of the 300 that they released of the first 300 cases the government investigated. I don't know why. I did actually, though, find a letter from that witness in the FBI files that I had not seen anywhere else before. And so we did get a few more things from that case. But one of the interesting things I've noticed about this government release is it's really kind of pointed out how many people are unfamiliar with the UFO history. Because whenever we get these government releases, you get a flurry of people on social media like, this document, this amazing document I just discovered, look what it proves, right? And one of these documents that kind of was making the rounds on Twitter this week was the Twining memo, the famous Twining memo. And it was kind of promoted as like, wow, we finally have got a copy of this Twining memo on the government website. And that just really kind of shows how uninformed you are about the history of this topic, because that memo was discussed in Ruppelt's book. The beginning of chapter 2 is one all about the Twining memo. That memo was published in its entirety in the Condon Report in 1969. That memo was released finally in image form where we could actually look at the real letter in 1986 via FOIA Act, and then was later included in like Timothy Good's book Above Top Secret, and it's been all over the literature. In fact, it's probably one of the most famous documents in all of UFO history, but yet you get people posting like, wow, what an amazing discovery. We can finally look at this memo. And it's like, we've been able to look at that memo for decades. And the thing I found with all these files as I've kind of gone through them was initially files that I had questions about I wasn't sure we had before. But last night I was actually able to find that they were declassified in 1997, and like we have seen that document before. In fact, I've actually shared pages from that document before. I found in one of my threads. There's one document release that is two memos having to do with General Sanford and the press conference in July 1952 that I'm unsure of that if we've seen before. That's really one of the only documents that I have in question right now that I've looked at of the whole shebang. So it's a lot of stuff that we've seen before. I'm happy that we have, as an archivist and a historian, I'm happy that we have higher quality copies of these documents and that we've got some less redactions on some of them. I think that's great. But at this point, it's nothing really new. And it's, you know, not going to move the needle. Supposedly this is just the first drop and there'll be more. And as always, it's going to be even more amazing the next time. I have a feeling if we get more documents, again, it's just going to be stuff that was already mandated to be released to NARA, you know, and it's probably stuff that we've even already seen before. They've already put on websites before, or researchers have already FOIA'd over the last 5 decades and got copies of, and we've seen before. So I'm not excited we're going to get a whole lot of new material, but I will be happy if we continue to get some higher quality copies of stuff, because some of the old copies we have are just really bad. Even if it's not redacted, the quality is so bad you can barely read it. It might as well be redacted. So anything we can get that's better quality, I'm happy to see.
And any comments on that, Allison? Anyone?
No, I just before we started, I was sharing with, asking Jack about the files, and I was just appreciative to be connected with this group, to be able to talk to people who know in depth about if there is anything good in the files. Like, I don't feel the need that I need to look at them, because by now I already am aware that, I might not know, or it might be propaganda or something. So I was really glad that we had you guys to tell us if there was anything spectacular in there. So
Thank you.
There's some
Yeah.
funny stuff in there. the FBI files are full of funny letters that people send in with their just crazy theories and ideas that are kind of interesting to read. And, there is quite a bit of contactee stuff in the FBI files that, was there before, just now in better quality. So, yeah, it can be entertaining to actually read some of this stuff and read what some of these people believe. Like, there's a guy that wrote into the FBI, or a guy or a lady, I don't remember, about seeing a balloon. Thought that they needed to know that. She
Oh my
didn't
goodness.
flying saucer, it's just a balloon, but she felt that she should report that.
They
do
had really
contactees talk to the FBI or let the FBI know that they've been in touch with?
Yeah.
Or how does that work? Is that some of the letters you're talking about?
Yeah, so there's people that have sent in letters about their alleged, experience and contacts, and then of course there's the FBI's involvement with certain like contactees, like the Kearney, Nebraska case from 1957, because a lot of these contactees were up to shady legal stuff as well, and so there's a few contactees that they've looked into over the years, and you can read about that in the FBI files.
Cool, thanks.
They had really good PR in those days that, as we've discussed, it was considered patriotic and upright and admirable to want to support the CIA and the FBI. And they had really good public images for the most part up until a certain point, up until they didn't. And yeah, there are some interesting letters in it. One that I came across when researching this book that I really appreciated, Jeff, was a young man wrote Director Hoover because, people just thought, like the nice policeman that wants to help people, that you just write Director Hoover, And he asked about NICAP, which he seems to have gotten a lot of letters of people asking him what's the deal with NICAP. And this young man was concerned that NICAP might have communist agendas, and could the director, help him, guide him on this matter. And as customary, Hoover responded that his typical no comment, that the FBI doesn't assess organizations or give opinions on their merit. And then he says, but for more on identifying communists and false agendas, and he gave the name of some material to read. And I thought, so he's basically saying because it was a really cold name too. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but like false prophets in the media or something, like that. I'd recommend you read this, young man. So it's like saying, I wouldn't trust Kehoe as far as I could throw him, kind of thing,
Speaking of the media, just to kind of piggyback on what Allison was saying a minute ago, she's like, I'm so grateful that I know this group where, I can talk about this and people that are a little more knowledgeable. Because if you're just going by the media reports and what the usual talking heads are saying, you wouldn't even know that these were things that were already out there that have been released for decades, right? You would think it was all new, all done recently by the Trump administration, and all of these people who are presenting it to us, including Tim Gallaudet and Jeremy Corbell and others. None of them are touching on the fact that this is all old stuff, all already been released, and it was mandated to do so, as Jeff said, years ago under a different administration.
And going by news reports is what got us in this mess in the first place, of like, I saw on the news that some CIA colonel at some ranch in Utah says beings are coming in and out of a portal, like it's on the news 20 years ago. There must be some truth to it. And, now 20 years later, here I am going, they haven't, presented a shred of conclusive evidence yet, and are all the more committed to their narrative.
The funny thing is the media doesn't seem to learn about this, because they've previously reported, like a few years ago, they had reported about a document release of like a bunch of Blue Book files now are available. And it was passed all around the media. And those of us who are knowledgeable had to point out, these documents have been available online for decades, like, 2 decades or more. Like, what, this is not a new release. Like, so the media doesn't really seem to care all that much about the factual accuracy of this kind of reporting. Like, it's a sensational new article that they can drop out there. It's not as sensational to point out that actually these files are old and were already released. It's just going up on a different website this time. I was
Jeff,
also just
oh.
I was going to point out again about the contactees. The funny thing, one of the funny things is one of the first document I opened when these files got released that morning was an FBI file that starts off with a copy of contactee Gabriel Green's Amalgamated Flying Saucer Clubs of America, had a magazine called Flying Saucers International. It's a high resolution scan of one of his issues of that contactee magazine. It was one of the first things in the FBI file, the very first FBI file that like I opened up. Because that's also the thing, is these files are full of documents that are not official government documents. Just like the CIA's got like National Enquirer and Weekly World News stuff in it. They will archive anything civilians send in. And so these files are full of just stuff that civilians sent into them that has nothing to do with actual government letters or, communications or investigations of any kind.
I had a question for you, Jeff. What was the reason that this woman was sending a letter about a balloon? Like, why? What was the significance to her of in the letter of the balloon?
I just think she felt it was important that they needed to know, and I don't know, maybe she thought it wasn't a balloon of ours. I have no idea. She
Okay.
just I saw a balloon and I thought I should notify you guys because of all this flying saucer stuff.
Interesting. I'd like to look at that.
It would make for a fun dinner party or, afternoon gathering to gather up some of those letters and just sit around and read them to each other for entertainment. Jeff, in some of the research that Allison and I do, I will track how long we will know information that you can easily find. Okay, easily find before it makes it to news organizations, and the lag time between that. And it can be very frustrating when it's only a little bit of information that doesn't provide the public with context, or that it's been out for that long.
I think a lot of news articles are just based on PR releases that get sent out. And so they're not even really investigating whether or not, these files, for example, were old. They just got a PR release that says government releasing so many files on such and such website. And so they write an article around that. There's no actual further checking. Journalism went out the door a million miles that way. They're basically just rehashing PR releases.
And that requires, that requires a level of media literacy to know how to read articles, to discern that it might be a PR release.
Yeah, we've discussed that, haven't we? Media literacy. We could do a whole show on, go through an article line by line and see, do they source this statement? Do they report this as a fact? Do they demonstrate it's a fact, and things like that? And I was going to say, and like you're saying, Jeff, with the it might just be a press release kind of thing. UFOs isn't a hill that a leading newspaper or media outlet wants to die on of going against the administration or like upsetting their contact that wants it framed well, because you're not going to get a lot of hits if you don't sensationalize the topic anyway. So you would like present a critical piece on the way that UFOs are framed, and you'd upset your contact and not get any web traffic. So like it's like just not a hill they're gonna die on.
There's every incentive to sensationalize and none to not, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And when the media does go to so-called experts, their experts are really just media personalities. They're media darlings like your Corbells and your people that are actually the completely wrong person to go to because they're completely unfamiliar with actually the history, you know, or the topic. So they're not even going to the best sources when they do bother to check with a source in the first place.
Like Rachel, you were mentioning, you know, that you'll get articles sent to you and you're like, oh yeah, that, like, how much do you want to know? You know, how much do you want me to tell you? I don't tell people, most people, you know, in my real life, for lack of a better term, that like I know not on the internet, but like friends or neighbors and things like that. And it's not even that like I don't hide it. Like if they know, fine. But I don't like it if I see them, you know, twice a year at neighborhood block parties or something. I don't want to get bombarded with all of this. Did you see? I saw on the news where this, and I saw that, you know, like I have a friend in real life that'll call me and say, what is this I'm hearing about, you know, Pentagon says UFOs are real. What happened? And you don't like being the person that's just always going, short answer, it's nothing, just, you know, never mind, because you just sound like some cynic. But like that is the short answer. It's nothing. It's just, you know, some show on CNN to get people to talk about it and check back later, you know? And so, yeah, I don't even tell, because I don't want to always like dampen their interest and dampen their spirit, you know, when you're like at a July 4th cookout or something, you know, you like don't want to go into a speech on, you know, critical thinking or media literacy or, you know, whatever may be more appropriate than, you know, some sensationalized UFO story. Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
on not this topic, but similar topics. If I try to explain to someone and then it starts going into, well, how do you know this? And you know, and just for example, I'll say, well, you know, do you know about controlled opposition or active measures? No, what is that? And then I find myself like, whoa, I should have never engaged in this conversation. This is so I can empathize with.
Yeah, we
Wow.
were out for tacos one time, and I told this other couple at least twice, probably three times, that I did not want to engage in the discussion. And finally, I did. You know, they were like, you know, nobody's going to get mad. It's okay to disagree. And so I said, well, this, and this. And like you're saying, Sharon, they said, well, how do you know that? And I'm like, that's why I didn't want to engage. I don't have a white paper in my back pocket. You know, I mean, If we're just sitting around talking, then we're just sitting around talking. And no, I don't like have links to give you, right, right.
And then I'll go, well, for my hobby, for my personal hobby, I study such and such. And then I sound like an eccentric person. Yeah, you do have to judge who you engage with, and that is taking me some practice.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the road is better than the end.
Yeah, I don't really I don't generally talk about UFOs with other people, and especially the older that I get, the more reticent I am to like have any kind of conversation about UFOs with people. Although, with one exception, I will ask people if they've seen UFOs. Um, but and then I'll just be really nice and like not share my beliefs with them basically. Because it gets messy. It's very complicated. There's a lot of complexity. Yeah. Um, and yeah, I think another thing I was thinking about with the UFO files is that it's so easy to like I feel like this is a Russian fire hose kind of thing because what they're doing is they're literally just taking news and all of these documents and then recontextualizing it based on what Jeff is saying, right? So like they don't even have to do anything. All they have to do is like take all of these files available to them, make up something to put like as the cover, like like the sort of main takeaway, and that's it. And then it just creates this huge mess. And then you have like like idiots who posing as experts or like disclosure ad or who are like calling themselves disclosure advocates and stuff like that, being the sort of uh person to like person's perspective that is somehow important, kind of, when it's actually just, you know, Jeremy Corbell or someone like that who doesn't know anything at all and just pretends to.
Yeah, sometimes I'll click just to see who the author is. I wonder who they allowed an op-ed on this or something. Another article, while I'm thinking about it, that folks might find worth a read is by Sean Beadle at a local outlet in Colorado. You can find Sean Beadle on Blue Sky, among other places. And they wrote about Lauren Boebert and some of her takes on this, which are in the woo-woo, what you might hear at an extremist conference kind of thing. And I really appreciated this one sentence that Sean Beadle had about Lauren Boebert's take is informed by 1977 CIA pilot John Lear's and current and frequent guest on Coast to Coast AM. And I was like, that's just great. That's great that Sean Beadle says, this is the CIA officer that was either, crazy as a rat or doing his job to say crazy things, whatever the case may be. These were his talking points, Representative Boebert. I really appreciated Sean's take on that. We also got some comments on last week's YouTube video from Vector of Knowledge, who I think is Luis Cayetano, at his YouTube channel, Vector of Knowledge. And he was quite supportive of Rachel and Jeff's research skills and them sitting in on the panel here. And another person that weighed in was SUFORC, which is a Serbian research group, and they made some valid points about propaganda and electronic warfare and the kind of things we were discussing. And one of the things that they made me consider in their comments was how the topic will be used by advocates, like To the Stars was doing this, that as long as they had an audience that were pro-alien, they'd be happy to smear the alien talk on thick and heavy. But if they were on a more moderate media outlet, they were fond of using the term, look, nobody's saying it's aliens, and that this is just a national security issue, and we need to know what's in our airspace. And that goes all the way back to one of Donald Kehoe's primary talking points that I'll tell you what it was, and I'll tell you why I think it was so crazy, but it was effective. He was a good PR man. He would say that the UFO issue needed the Air Force and the CIA to release their files and tell the public what was going on, because the misidentification of a UFO could inadvertently start a world war or a response by the American military that we couldn't take back once we had done, like he was suggesting, you know, some type of atomic warfare or weapon of mass destruction. And that was embraced by UFO advocates. Like it kind of sounds like a good talking point. These pilots, these radar operators, they need the information. They need to know what they're looking at. Kind of sounds reasonable till you drill down a little deeper in it and consider that from the perspective of the Air Force and the radar operators, it's always a foreign adversary till they know it's not. Like, that's just how they frame it, is to suggest it might be interplanetary visitors, so don't fire at them, is just crazy. That like from the perspective of, so you want radar operators trained to go, don't get hasty. It might be from Mars when they see paints on their radar. It's hard to even describe how much that goes against Air Force and CIA procedures as I understand them, that Kehoe managed to make a significant talking point with frightening the American public about, you know, war may break out because we inadvertently thought that this was a Russian missile.
Are these the YouTube comments?
Yes, SUFORC and Vector of Knowledge were on YouTube, and SUFORC made some remarks that made me think about Kehoe's framing of that. Which also brings me to, if you would like to sit in on these readings and discussions, we would be happy to have you. Reach out to me at jackbrewerblog at yahoo.com and request your free PDF of Wayward Sons, NICAP, and the IC, and ask to be put on the email list for people that receive the invitations. And then you could join us here in the Zoom recordings. We record on Wednesday nights Eastern time, and then we upload it to YouTube for public access. Any other comments or thoughts?
Well, one other thing that made me think of is a conversation I was having recently where we were talking with a friend. We were talking about ontological shock. Like it feels to me like people make this really big deal about ontological shock, and I just don't really buy it. So, you know, maybe it's a me problem or something, but it seems like, um, you know, if you like, uh, if you were put in contact with aliens as an individual or maybe as a society or something, would people, you know, would our society or would individuals in our society really be like, would it be such a huge existential shock to them to encounter something like that when it's such a huge aspect of our culture, like going back centuries, you know? Um, and and I just don't think that it's true. And I feel like a lot of times when you hear people from like SCU or the Soul Foundation or something like that, who are trying to kind of argue for this scientific basis for certain aspects of UFO related stuff, that they'll bring up ontological shock as though it's a really it almost seems like it's bolstering the importance of the topic, but it seems to be very artificial to me.
I agree with that. In fact, I think that that's really the crux of the matter is Kehoe was grasping at straws, in my opinion, to blame someone for his lack of ability to substantiate his claims. And to me, his most enduring legacy on the UFO community was there's aliens here, I just know it. And if the CIA would stop lying to me, they could prove it. The Air Force has the proof, but they won't release it. And I'm not responsible for my assertions. And in my opinion, that was his most lasting legacy. And I think that is a great point, Rachel, that if we stop arguing about the cover up, we'll see, to call back to Pilkington here, it's a mirage that there's no reason for a cover up. Like, as scientists often say, you can't get them to shut up about their work. Why would they not want to tell people what they're working on that's of such great significance?
Yeah.
And then we have to do mental gymnastics to come up with answers to that question, when it really just doesn't make sense in the first place. What makes sense is cover-ups of intelligence operations, counterintelligence operations, deception operations. That makes sense. What doesn't make sense is this interplanetary spacecraft crashed in 1947, and here's what's left of it, and here's what tests on it indicate, but we're not going to tell anybody. Doesn't make sense. I'm open to arguments, but that's my argument.
Well, I had 2 points, and one of them is gone, so I'm just going to go with the remaining not as interesting point. So, when you were describing Kehoe's role, you know, like in America, he kind of sounds like you know, like how I imagine a schizophrenic person's delusions are, you know, in like in their mind, you know. There's like this one voice that's like, you know, hey, the CIA is covering up aliens like all the time. And that's sort of what has come to dominate in our society. Okay, that was the other point. It was Prometheus that in Prometheus, like, I mean, there's lots of movies where scientists are not acting like real scientists would. Like, that's a pretty common thing. But in Prometheus, it's really striking that the scientists are just downright stupid and like selfish and like just like eschewing like all sorts of basic things that you'd see a scientist doing in real life. And these are people like on a spaceship traveling through intergalactic space to, like, and they're just like complete morons. And it feels like it's just like this like a reflection of like kind of like where we're at right now. Like with the in terms of how the public sees science. Like because like I don't think you would have been able to get away with that kind of thing in a huge movie, maybe. Well, maybe you could have, I don't know. But it felt like a very a product of its time and culture very much.
Yes, thank you. And Jeff, you shared some information in the chat there. I will put that in the video description on YouTube. And would you tell us about that link, please?
Yeah, so I shared two links. The first one was what I briefly mentioned earlier. A guy ran a large language model called Mistral AI, which builds really great like markdown files, like structured markdown analysis of the file, like transcription that's laid out exactly like the original file. And so on that website, you can download the text files of the PDFs that were released. And like each page is just separated by a delimiter that says page, page, page. And so there's perfect transcriptions. They're easy to search through. I just put them all up on a Google Drive myself, my own personal Google Drive. And that way I can just search in Google and it'll search through all the files. If you have, there's software you can install on your own computer that can search through a bunch of files. But and the other site I shared a link to is a site called probe.space, where a guy basically did the same thing. He took all those files, he ran them through the AI model that made transcriptions and did some semantic analysis to come up with keywords to kind of like lay out what's in the files. And I've actually even been using his website a lot to just search through the files. Like, say you want to search like Kehoe, for example, you can pop in Kehoe and it'll show you all the files that have that key phrase in it. You can then click on one of them. It'll load up the information in that file. It'll show you the different pages where Kehoe is mentioned. Just like if you search for something in Google Books, it'll show you sections of the page where it's mentioned. And then you can just click to the original file. It'll open up in a new window on that page of the PDF where you can see those different, you can see the result that you look for. And so that's the site that I've been using that somebody's built that makes it easy to search the files without having to download them all to your home computer or set up anything else. So
Thank you. Yeah, I will be looking more into that because I'm interested in things like Gabriel Green and see if it's the same records that I've already received on him. And even if not, if it's better quality copies, then I'd want to add those to my collection and EFR's, you know, online collections and whatnot. So shall we go ahead and finish chapter 7 or any further comments for now on anything we've discussed thus far?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing. In one of the previous chapters that we read, I followed one of the footnotes to you know, the Google Drive of a bunch of NICAP documents and whatnot. And one of the ones that was there was like the text of an article about NICAP that got published in a newspaper right at the very beginning when NICAP was forming. And it really struck me because the people that I quoted, and I don't remember who I quoted, but they talked about how basically the philosophy was they didn't know what the UFOs were, and they were open to any interpretation, and that's what they were going to try to find out. And it just struck me that that's not at all what NICAP became. What you were just describing was Kehoe was saying it's UFOs and aliens, and the government knows about it, and they have to tell us. It was a great article. It made it sound like NICAP was really interesting, but it just seems like it just morphed into something that was like the opposite.
And they always do that, all the way to the Stars Academy of recent years, because that's what they're interested in. You know, like we are interested in aliens when we get drawn to the topic. And when we're speaking with a newspaper reporter that may make us a little bashful about that or ashamed of it, we may measure our words better. You know, if Christopher Mellon is talking to CNN instead of a softball guy with a YouTube channel that's all about pro aliens, he's going to handle himself differently. And it's very discouraging that it like shows they even knew what they should have been doing.
Yes, exactly.
They understood that this scientific facade is a facade, that you're really just hunting aliens. Yeah, in my opinion. And thanks for bringing that up, Randy.
Yeah.
We'll be starting on chapter 7 just after the section on Project Palladium and electronic warfare. It starts with during email exchanges. Is everybody there? Would anyone like to volunteer to read? Thank you. Thanks.
All right. During email exchanges, Jan Aldrich pointed out the potential significance to the NICAP saga of a document known as JANET 146. That was the Joint Army-Navy Air Force publication 146. It referred to a Joint Chiefs of Staff Directive, Communication Instructions for Reporting Vital Intelligence Sightings, Service. The 1953 directive outlined procedures for reporting and sharing information about what personnel were witnessing. As the name implies, it was classified, and it most certainly included reporting unidentified flying objects. As pretty much anyone even remotely knowledgeable about military procedures should tell you, the armed forces have long been extremely interested in airspace and its monitoring. Its primary responsibility. A lot of the confusion comes with framing what differences there may be between a UFO and your run-of-the-mill bogey. Aldrich suggested Major Fournet and Admiral Hillenkoetter were in positions to be aware of service, yet bound by security oaths not to disclose it to Major Kehoe and company. They would, of course, also include any insights they may have had about the circumstances. Potential problems obviously arise when collaborators in a research group, such as NICAP, possess varying levels of awareness of situations, yet have their hands tied about sharing it. We need look no further than the JANET 146 and YouTube program for specific examples. Even without such examples, security concerns should nonetheless be apparent surrounding officers mingling with investigators who are inquisitive about their professional activities. It is my understanding this is typically heavily frowned upon if the officers are not actually working in some type of official capacity, such as counterintelligence. Moreover, Kehoe and others argued men such as Hillenkoetter and Fournet were in positions that their interest in UFOs further validated the topic itself. However, by that very argument, if such men ultimately knew no more about the alleged saucers than the rest of us, the value of their supposedly informed opinions was debatable. Anyway, that we may keep coming at any way that we may keep coming at it, a primary storyline, perhaps the primary storyline, is the security issues at stake. Not due to saucers, but the people and officers who carry on about saucers. It seems inevitable that agents and informants would be enlisted to infiltrate such groups and report on what was taking place among the members. Key personnel issued security clearances would be targeted by bad actors for information extraction. False information would be injected into the social circles for a variety of purposes. Deception operations and psychological warfare would inevitably ensue, where the public and its belief systems simply considered collateral damage. Even the famous CIA project MK Ultra left footprints in UFO history, or vice versa, depending
Thanks,
on how.
Jeff. Let's hang on. Let's hang on there a second, please. Thank you. That reminds me, you know, considering what did different people in NICAP know in professional capacities that they had oaths not to talk about to people that aren't read into projects that are in NICAP. Reminds me, just this week, a researcher named Robert Scarla, I think is the pronunciation, Skarvla, that's on social media and has some salient input on different topics, in my opinion. He posted something to the effect of the UFO files that are about UFO people are much more interesting than the files that are about sightings. That, like, the files that are about the FBI following the UFO people, the investigators, the contactees, the witnesses, like that Colonel Amos case, we were trying to figure out why would people be saying these things, like almost up stages. Yeah, some young men saw something, and you know, the Air Force is trying to figure out what it was. But why did Colonel Amos care? And why was Corbin misrepresenting the timeline and all of these different things? And I think that's a really good point. That I think that's some of the more interesting aspects of this is Hillenkotter knew all kinds of stuff that he's just kind of throwing out these statements to the press that are still, they're like making them into memes and putting them on social media today that are like overly simplistic, juvenile type statements about, with all the stars in the galaxy, there must be something out there kind of stuff, you know? Any thoughts, or shall we just continue?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think have a point there, and you get into it, I think, more in the next chapter, though, about how a lot of these people that are put up, you know, to kind of prop up the topic, like, look, we've got these credentialed guys, you know, that are with us, you know, and these guys, you know, you don't even have to say they know something. You can kind of imply, you know, just based on their position that, you know, they must know something, otherwise they wouldn't be involved in this, right? But every single time it turns out, we eventually come to realize these guys did not know anything. Like, it was just, you know, they had other reasons to be in the topic, or maybe it was just a personal interest in the topic. And everything that they've been telling us did not come from their UFO, their actual official career at all. Like, it just came from the UFO community itself. And so that's the problem when you appeal to credentials. You know, when, you know, there's a lot of credentialed people that believe a lot of wacky stuff. Like, the appeal to credentials just doesn't work out, and assuming that they know something just because they held this position of power. And we see that to this day with, like, the missing scientist story again that we briefly talked about, you know, like Mr. McCaslin, and people point out, like, this guy worked in these positions at this, you know, research lab. If UFOs are real, then they must know something about it. So this guy's got to know something about it. Like, it's just all these indirect connections that people just believe because of positions that people have, when, as we find out, they didn't really know anything in the first place.
That's a really good point. Like Luis Elizondo, his whistleblower statements seem more related to reading Jacques Vallée than anything that may or may not have had to do with his job sometimes, you know, or at least what he says to the media is one interpretation. And yeah, like you're saying, if he was in the CIA and he wanted to be in NICAP, is why Hillencutter is a big deal being at NICAP. Well, then doesn't that mean he didn't learn anything about UFOs at the CIA? You know, like it can't be both, you know, like is he informing the NICAP officers, or is he there because he'd like to know what UFOs are? You know, it can't be both. Is a really valid point, in my opinion. So sure, if you'd like to continue reading, Jeff, please.
Yeah. Even the infamous CIA project MK Ultra left footprints in UFO history, or vice versa, depending on how we want to look at it. Initial Director of Central Intelligence, Admiral Roscoe H. Hillencutter, May 1947 to October 1950, was followed by General Walter Bedell Smith, October 1950 to February 1953. The next DCI was Allen Dulles, who held the position the longest of all CIA directors, from February 1953 to November 1961. It was Dulles who formally authorized MKUltra on April 13, 1953, following several years of questionable and unethical agency research and development. The large-scale behavior modification endeavor and related programs continued into the 1970s. The late writer and researcher Hank B. Albarelli, Jr. explored such circumstances in his 2009 book, A Terrible Mistake: The Murder of Frank Olson and the CIA's Secret Cold War Experiments. Albarelli explained his interactions with MKUltra project director Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist and former chief of technical services staff. In 1997, Gottlieb reportedly told Albarelli UFOs were out of his reach of knowledge, adding that he found the subject fascinating. There is something there, and that people see something is unquestioned, Gottlieb continued. I think for me, it's best to leave it like that. Did the CIA leave it like that? Albarelli asked. I assume no. I assume not. No, Gottlieb replied.
Thanks, Jeff. Let's pause there. Big can of worms here. Now we're kind of transitioning into Sid Gottlieb and his portion of the CIA. Should it be as compartmentalized from Hillencutter and Director Smith and Director Dulles as it sometimes is? Or wouldn't it kind of stand to reason the manager of Walmart knows what they're doing in the warehouse?
Yeah, I was wondering, like, if I don't know much about Sid Gottlieb, but if he could be, you know, like kind of saying two things at the same time here, like because like he's saying, um, uh, you know, do you think that the CIA is investigating UFOs, or like that there's something to it? And like he's kind of like, yeah, and yeah, the CIA probably is investigating that. Like what he's saying is like that the CIA is engaging in this sort of psychosocial dimension of UFOs, but um, but you could equally just interpret that as meaning, oh, the CIA is investigating flying saucers, like it's a magic show or something. Like, yeah, of course the CIA is doing a magic show, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. He did a lot of double speak. He was not bashful at all about saying he couldn't remember. He would um he was relentless, really, about saying, "I don't recall that." Like the jokes about, mobsters on television that, will tell prosecutors, "I do not recall that." That was kind of how Gottlieb was. It's really amazing that we got as much accountability as we did, in a manner of speaking, with the church committee. For those unaware, the MK Ultra files were mostly destroyed. Former director Helms ordered them destroyed, or eventual director Helms ordered them destroyed when the project was supposedly ceased and when the church committee started looking into it. And as the story goes, some boxes of financial records were overlooked. And those are what John Marks got released with the help of lawyers in the court, or we wouldn't know anything about it. And I think the public largely averts from that truth, because what we learned from documentation is so disturbing that it really hurts the narrative of what America is and what it stands for, and democracy and human rights, to even consider that we only got the tip of the iceberg. Likely, probably, is really concerning. And by the way, while I'm thinking about it, we've mentioned Dr. Jeffrey Kay's work before. He co-wrote some articles with Hank Albarelli that we're discussing now, and I will put the link in the YouTube description. It's worth a read about their work into believing that Project Artichoke was much wider and more impactful than it was represented by the CIA and represented in the news. Generally, the narrative is there was Bluebird with Hillenkoetter that led to Artichoke, and then in 53, Dulles greenlighted MK Ultra, and Albarelli and Kay make an argument, and I think it's Cries from the Past, Torture's Ugly Echoes, I think is the title. They make an argument of the vastness of Project Artichoke, and that records that suggest people were killed during it, the way that they were interrogated in European safe houses. And I do think this ties directly into what we're learning about the Office of Policy Coordination and who was involved in it. And as we'll discover later in the book, that Joseph Bryan had a Princeton associate named Pinky Thompson, who was an MK Ultra bagman in Europe and things like that. That I think this ties pretty directly into the whole narrative. Who would like to continue reading, please?
Where were we?
Right after Gottlieb's comments. So Albarelli wrote that in 1956.
Albarelli wrote that in 1956 and again in 1957, Gottlieb asked professional magician John Mulholland to examine and render an opinion on UFO reports. Mulholland, a consultant for the agency, had in 1953 composed a 71-page CIA manual titled Some Operational Applications of the Art of Deception. He is also accredited with writing the agency manual, Recognition Signals. Gottlieb reportedly enlisted Mulholland to discreetly investigate the now famous 1955 Kelly-Hopkinsville case, which occurred at the Sutton home in Kentucky. There are no known documents pertaining to Mulholland's research or findings. DCI Richard Helms ordered the destruction of MK Ultra files in 1973, greatly hampering investigation of the program and its some 149 sub-projects. Gottlieb told Albarelli he could not recall anything about the Hopkinsville investigation. He is known among researchers for his selectively poor memory. Gottlieb reportedly stated during congressional hearings he was unable to remember details and often even basic aspects of MK Ultra subprojects, including personnel and what they were supposed to be doing. Albarelli further reported that Mulholland visited Levelland, Texas, in the weeks following widely publicized UFO sightings of November 2nd through 3rd, 1957. The Levelland case is a staple among UFO enthusiasts who typically consider it rather compelling, at least of something. Writer and researcher Kevin Randall blogged in 2020 about coming across a November 6, 1957 newspaper clipping suggesting the reported UFOs were, quote, American inventions, unquote. The article contains the account of an Arthur P. Ticknor, a chemical engineer who said he and companions happened upon a secret airfield in 1953 in New Mexico. Their adventure reportedly involved armed security personnel and witnessing the flight of what he seemed to think were extraordinary aircraft. It is from there that Ticknor deduced flying objects reported in Levelland in 1957 were American inventions. My initial reaction was to search for Mr. Ticknor's name in locations such as the previously mentioned list of pseudonyms used by State Department employees, but I haven't turned up anything yet. Do you want me to keep going?
Sure, go ahead and finish up if you would, please.
Okay. Albarelli's A Terrible Mistake explores events surrounding the November 1953 death of CIA biochemist Frank Olson. The author makes the case it was a murder perpetrated for reasons related to Olson's involvement in covert and unethical weapons testing. The author explained that during the decade he spent researching the circumstances prior to the book's 2009 release, he was contacted on multiple occasions by people asserting Olson was killed to keep his knowledge of UFOs and aliens concealed. One person who seemed quite knowledgeable about Camp Dietrich, Albarelli wrote, claimed that definite evidence proving alien contact. Excuse me, I'm sorry. One person who seemed quite knowledgeable about Camp Dietrich, Albarelli wrote, claimed that definitive evidence proving an alien contact with Earth had been removed from UFO crash or landing sites by the government. This evidence was allegedly transported for study to Camp Dietrich and other military installations. That several of the key CIA and Army participants in Olson's death were involved in the government's UFO research in the 1950s is certainly interesting. Um, unquote. Had he not been convinced Olson's death involved other reasons, Albarelli continued, some of these theories may have been much more provocative. I interpret Albarelli to have suggested some of the UFO-related stories may have been put in his path to deter his direction of research. As may have been the case with Dr. Olivo Fontes and many more before and since, perhaps tales of crashed saucers and alien artifacts were used in an effort to influence or exploit Hank Albarelli.
Thank you, Rachel. Any comments, thoughts?
So if there's no record of this John Mulholland guy's investigation into the UFOs, so it was Gottlieb that told Albarelli he was doing this after he just said, hey, I don't want to get in this anymore. And then he told him, actually, but I had this guy go investigate Levelland and Hopkinsville, but I don't know any details. Is that where he got the information?
That's a valid concern, that if Albarelli was getting information from unreliable narrators, we don't know why he would say some of the things he did. Sid Gottlieb or other CIA people. I think at the time I was working on this, Albarelli was still alive, and I tried to get some of his direct references, and I was not as successful with it as I hoped I would be. So my apologies, Jeff, that I can't tell you exactly where he got that from. He deduced somehow, or believes he deduced, that Mulholland was sent by Gottlieb, or Gottlieb told him so, yes. But without going back through my notes, I'm unable to tell you exactly where I came up with that. And the fact that I didn't use a footnote would suggest to me that I didn't have one. So I apologize about that.
Yeah, it seemed weird to me. Like, he told him he didn't really want to talk about this stuff, but then all of a sudden he had all these stories about Gottlieb sending people to investigate. I'm like, wait a second. So where's that even come from?
Yeah, and that is how Gottlieb would do. Which is not unusual for CIA people to say they can't talk about something and then proceed to sit there and do an interview on it.
We certainly see that to this very day with these so-called whistleblowers, where I cannot talk about that. 2 seconds later, there's alien biologics that are from Zeta Reticuli. It's like, what? I thought you couldn't talk about stuff, but now you're at your other end of your mouth, you're talking about all sorts of stuff. What?
Yeah. Now, one thing I'll give Albarelli the benefit of the doubt with Mulholland is we can look at these particular resources, pamphlets that Mulholland wrote, and we can see that he was attributed with being the author and providing the CIA with training materials on sleight of hand. It doesn't seem unreasonable to me to think that he may have been consulted with about take a look at some UFO cases and tell me, if you were a magician, how would you have done this? And seems reasonable to me that they'd try to figure that out. That is somebody messing with us? How are they doing it? But we can trace Mulholland to the CIA materials at the least. He's widely cited as a CIA asset, but that's a valid point Jeff raises of can we literally put him in Levelland, Texas on such and such a date? I do not recall.
And those CIA manuals that Mulholland wrote, those are public. Those have been released. We can look at those.
I believe I have looked at them, is my memory, yes. If any of this, if I'm incorrect about any of this, do not be bashful about correcting me, sending me links. Let me know on YouTube or Blue Sky, or however most convenient to help me correct it and get it straight.
The last
Any other
sentence in
thoughts?
the last sentence in this chapter, I mentioned this to Jack over email about, trying to distract authors with in their line of investigation by using tales of UFOs. This reminded me of, like, back in the 90s, I read this UFO book called Out There by Howard Blum. And for whatever reason, I only remember one thing from that book. And it's that at the very beginning, he says he was um, interviewing a government source for a completely unrelated topic. And that source suggested to him that he should look into UFOs, that there might be something there. And that's how he started his whole investigation that led to that book. So I don't know if that was an attempt to distract him from his research or not, but it reminded me of that. And I just think it's kind of funny how sometimes those little details stick with you after, decades.
Yeah, that was a primary point for me too, Randy, of including Albarelli in his work in the chapter. I have not read A Terrible Mistake cover to cover. I purchased it on Kindle and use it like as a research book, like it's searchable. So I use it like a research book. And he makes an extremely convincing argument that I'll butcher the translation, but here goes. The point d'esprit event in France that some think was, some type of mass behavioral situation. Some think may have been moldy bread that caused mass hallucinations. Others theorize may have been an MK Ultra type project where a town of people went mad one night. And he made a very convincing argument out of documents he references in A Terrible Mistake that it was a CIA operation. And his general argument is Frank Olson was murdered, that he didn't commit suicide because Frank Olson was aware of experiments, MK Ultra type chemical experiments going on at Camp Detrick. And it wasn't that awareness that got him murdered as much as Frank Olson's remorse about these experiments, and that he was depressed, very guilty. And Frank Olson was among people that went on a now infamous retreat that Sid Gottlieb held for key personnel. And he dosed the men on this retreat covertly with LSD. And in the days following that, Olson did not respond well as they had hoped, apparently, at all. And this was an insane CIA during that period. There were other circumstances of just dosing your coworker covertly as like part of the day's events. And like you were supposed to learn to cover your drink and don't sip a drink that you walked away from. And you're learning how to put things in other people's drinks. And some of the results of that were just terrible, that they were extremely concerned that the public would find out about. Men running down the street, hiding beneath cars that, were in the throes of LSD hallucinations and things. And some of it was framed kind of comically too in a New Yorker article in more recent years about one doctor that I believe was at Camp Dietrich that said he came in one morning and there was just a vat in his office that he didn't know what it was or where it came from. And eventually he opened it to look in it, and he said there was enough hallucinogens in it to like kill half the state of Maryland. And he said, and within a couple of days, it was just gone as quickly and covertly as it arrived, and then it was just gone. And this guy had a number of stories about the people, the colorful people he worked with as well. One of those stories was about a coworker that became a drug addict and was experimenting with a lot of the drugs on himself that he was also giving the volunteers. And he came in one night for his shift in his underwear and told this doctor that was being interviewed in the New Yorker that he had ingested such and such. He'd tried it on his skin. He like placed it under his watch and put it, was wearing his watch. And while he's parading around in his underwear, he informed his coworker, but it didn't work. And New Yorker chose to frame this stuff humorously, where, yeah, I'm quite certain Frank Olson's family found it much less amusing. But there's that.
Yeah, sorry, I totally God, I hate it when this happens. Okay. Well, I guess one thing that I would also add too is that the MK Ultra, they also did actually attempt brainwashing through a university in Canada, which involved basically taking patients and then keeping them like in bed for really long periods of time and just dosing them constantly with tons of meds and using electroshock therapy and like all of this awful stuff to because what they were trying to do was understand how China was able to like reprogram these POWs and this was it had really horrible effects on some of the people involved, like there are interviews with them available online. And I mean, there's also interviews with Frank Olson's family as well. And yeah, it's pretty awful. Like they actually did this stuff. Like when yeah, like I think crazy is an apt term for what MK Ultra was like. It was really horrible to American and Canadian citizens, but it was also really pseudoscientific and extremely paranoid. Um,
Yes,
um,
thank you.
I also thought it was interesting too that that this germ warfare or well, okay, so I don't know what the Albarelli book says specifically that Frank Olson was involved in or may have been involved in. I know that in the documentary series Wormwood, like that the they talk about him being involved in germ warfare research in Korea during the Korean War. So I don't know like the in-depth stuff about that. And also I've heard some critiques about Errol Morris lately, but I mean the information is there in that documentary, and there's also interviews with some people that were close to Frank Olson. Um, I just thought it was interesting, and what it like the fact that they brought in a magician. What I'm wondering is, was the magician consulted for, tactical reasons, like? Could the UFO be being used sort of like a cup and ball type of misdirection thing? So they're saying, oh, yeah, of course we're researching UFOs, And when like this is just actually a distraction for some other form of experimental technology or experimental warfare or something like that.
Yes, and these are valid points, and there are a number of side plots that tie into all this. An author named Raymond Fowler wrote books on the Hills and the Pont Saint-Esprit incident that was suspected to be, a false flag CIA experiment kind of thing.
I was going to say something about that too.
Yeah, and yeah, there's a lot of sidebars. Please go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jack.
It's
Yeah,
okay.
I think that that's called ergotism. It's where this fungus called ergot grows on barley, and it's thought that this happened a lot in France during the Middle Ages. But I mean, I just don't think I don't know a lot about this Pointe d'Esprit thing, but I mean, I've heard of it, but it seems to me that like if you were if there was ergot growing on your crop or something like that, it wouldn't just be like this really quick thing. Like everyone would just go crazy all at once at the same time for like a short period of time only. It doesn't seem very realistic to me. I don't know, but maybe I just don't misunderstood, and maybe I don't know enough about the case.
That's the gist of it.
Did the effects wear off, or were these people?
So, ergot is kind of like LSD. It contains this like chemical that acts kind of like LSD. So if you eat barley that has the ergot in it, you're gonna basically be on this psychotropic drug for a while, for maybe like 12 hours or something like that, like sort of how regular hallucinations like LSD and psilocybin and stuff like that, those last for the amount of time it takes for your body to basically metabolize it.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Not an expert, by the way, just that's what I
LSD is actually made from the claviceps ergot fungus. You either start with a chemical called ergotartamine, which is used for migraines. It's typically mixed with caffeine and given to people for migraine headaches. But you either start with that or a chemical called ergocrystine, both from the ergot fungus that they collect, and then they synthesize LSD from there. So LSD isn't made totally synthetically. It's actually made from the ergot fungus.
Thanks, Jeff.
It's a very interesting case in itself. And then Albarelli's take on it, I think, is very interesting as well. I think there were a couple of suicides, Randy, if I recall right, that everybody just went crazy one night in this French village. And I think there were some deaths, and then Albarelli ties together people that he could place in the location at the time, and has some really convincing documents that he located that it was discussed, and were pretty damning. And let's just face it. Like I appreciate you bringing up the Canadian facility, Rachel. That was McGill University in Montreal. That the Hills visited Montreal and were returning home on their fateful journey with memories of a man with a foreign accent, which is very peculiar. But none of that would be anything more than just talk if it weren't for the fact we know lunatics were running around drugging people, unsuspecting people on subways. So how did these people interpret what happened to them, and how does it get in the mainstream lore and history 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, like we wouldn't have to wonder, did the CIA do this to the Hills? Did the CIA do this to Villas Boas in Argentina or Brazil? We wouldn't have to wonder, but we conclusively know lunatics were running around drugging people with airborne drugs, you know? So, which ones? What are their stories? If this is really similar to how we were discussing, if we know there's a satellite reentry, well, then the UFO case should involve the satellite reentry and the UFO sighting. Well, if we know people were getting drugged covertly, where are their stories? Like, we should have those stories. I'm sure we can find some, but I'm also sure a lot of people just didn't run to an attorney's office or a police station to tell them they're afraid they lost their mind, you know. Go ahead, Rachel.
I'm sorry. Yeah, well, it also makes me think of James McDonald too. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about James McDonald, not just in this section, but earlier on in the chapter too. There's a lot of different mechanisms that you can see here going on that could have potentially driven this man to, take his own life, a lot, not just the use of drugs, but also through these psychosocial mechanisms. If you're like in a field where you find that there are all of these people around you deliberately lying about the substance of that field, but you're serious about it, I could see why that could potentially result in that. And it's really worrisome to me too, because now this is like mainstream stuff. This is what politics is now in our country. It's scary.
Yeah, and we can look at the James McDonald files and see how the political activities of his wife were extremely frowned upon by some of the, or I'll put it this way, the FBI agents documenting her activity chose to quote outlets that were framing it very negatively. Let's put it that way. And you as we've discussed, you have to cross-reference these dates too. Like when I've gotten to where I'm familiar enough with the NICAP story to now when I hear someone wrote an article in November 1957 saying that blah, 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 I'll pretty automatically think, oh, that's right about the time that NICAP had incorporated and was getting their executive board together. And I'll just kind of figure that. And yeah, it is inseparable. All of the covert operations, the surveillance, as we've talked about in previous episodes, FBI, COINTELPRO, CIA covert testing on American citizens and servicemen. Again, Albarelli and Kay's article on Project Artichoke is really worth a read about that what the CIA was directing its assets to do about people the assets had interrogated that now they pretty much can't just release. And all of this, yeah, I believe all of this factors in the big picture. Yes, I do. Does anyone have any other thoughts or comments they'd like to voice? Any closing thoughts? Anything anyone would like to express?
I just wanted to say that I will be releasing a couple of interviews in the next week. One is an old interview, the second interview I did with Jeff White Bear Kingsbury. And I think it turned out really well. I suggest people check it out. Jeff has been really supportive of Jeff Knox in the past, and he also they just did a interview on earlier that was posted earlier this week. I am also going to be posting an interview with Steph Quick, so another interview with her, and we'll be talking about migraines as well as a bunch of other stuff.
And where can we find that, Rachel?
You can find that on the UFO Sunset YouTube channel.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to give anyone a heads up about their work and activities?
I just want to say a big thank you to Jeff for going through all of these newly released documents and archiving them, and then linking to some of these other places too that are providing transcripts. That is great. I'm glad people are out there doing this. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Indeed.
I agree. Thank you so much, Jeff. It's
Yeah.
pretty awesome work.
You're welcome. And if you guys don't follow Jason Colavito already, I recommend following him. He's been going through, reading all these crazy letters and posting just, a ton of them every single day that he's been finding in the files and sharing them. So if you're interested in some of the entertaining letters that have been sent in, follow Jason Colavito and check out the ones that he's been sharing.
Any other?
I'll add if anybody's bored tomorrow night. I'll be doing an interview with UFO Intros on Twitter. I guess via Space. So yeah, if anybody wants to tune in tomorrow night, 8 o'clock Eastern time, feel free to do that. And looking forward to that interview with Jeff. Rachel, can't wait.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for reading
you.
tonight. Sorry I had to duck out.
Any other final thoughts?
I just wanted to say I really enjoy this book group. I highly recommend it. It's really great. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Rachel, and thanks to all of you. I appreciate all of your time, attention, and input. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. I endlessly look forward to these Wayward Wednesdays. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And as mentioned earlier, you too can join the discussions we record on Wednesday nights. Shoot me an email at jackbrewerblog@yahoo.com to learn more. You'll find that email address in the video description on YouTube, as you will links to sites and circumstances referenced during this episode. Visit Expanding Frontiers Research at expandingfrontiersresearch.org. You can also visit our Patreon for more resources and to financially support us with a monthly donation, if so moved. If you would prefer to make a one-time donation, you can visit our GoFundMe page, where we are an authorized, verified nonprofit. Thank you for your interest, and we will see you next time.